The quiet hum of Maple Grove at dawn was my favorite soundtrack. The air, crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth, always carried the promise of a peaceful day. Reese Kincaid, a man of 32, cherished this tranquility above all else. My home, a modest rental tucked away on a leafy cul-de-sac, was my sanctuary. It was where I unwound after a long day, where I nurtured my small garden, and most importantly, where I shared my life with Scout, my loyal German Shepherd mix. Scout wasn't just a pet, he was family, a furry shadow who understood the rhythm of my days and the subtle shifts in my moods. His comforting presence was a constant reminder of the simple joys I sought to protect. My routines were predictable, almost ritualistic: morning coffee on the small back porch, listening to the birds, followed by a long walk with Scout through the quiet neighborhood streets. I was by nature a creature of habit and stubbornly attached to the serene order I had built around myself. My impulsiveness, usually kept in check by a desire for peace, rarely surfaced unless my boundaries were truly tested. Little did I know those boundaries were about to be shattered. The first crack in my quiet world appeared with the arrival of the new tenants next door, the Caldwells. I knew only their surname, a vague, distant courtesy from my landlord. They were a family, or at least a group of people, who seemed to operate on a different frequency than the rest of Maple Grove. Initially, it was just minor annoyances. Late-night chatter that bled into my bedroom window, occasional loud music, the unfamiliar thud of heavy footsteps upstairs. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just the adjustment period, that things would settle. I'd lived in this house for 5 years, and the previous neighbors had been as quiet as field mice. My initial emotion was a mix of mild annoyance and the hope that it was temporary. The kind of frustration you swallow down with a sigh, not wanting to make a fuss. But the adjustment period never ended. Instead, it escalated. Mr. Caldwell, a burly man with a perpetually scowling face, developed a habit that gnawed at my nerves like a persistent itch. He would set up a battered camping chair directly outside our shared property line, beneath my bedroom window, and simply sit there. All day. Every day, he wasn't doing anything, not talking on the phone, not reading, just staring blankly, occasionally mumbling to himself. It felt invasive, a silent, unsettling invasion of my personal space. I started closing my blinds, drawing the curtains even in the brightest part of the day, a small concession that felt like a major defeat. My home, once a bastion of openness, was becoming a fortress. The evenings, however, were when the true chaos began. The Caldwells seemed to have an endless procession of friends. Cars would line the street, music would blast, and laughter, loud and often drunken, would echo through my walls. We had a lease-enforced quiet hour in our building, a reasonable expectation that noise would cease by 10 o'clock at night. For the first few weeks, I gritted my teeth, pulling my pillow over my head, trying to channel my inner stoic. My stubbornness was kicking in, a refusal to let their disrespect define my peace. I was determined to outlast them, to somehow make them realize the error of their ways without direct confrontation. But then came the night it all truly boiled over. It was a Tuesday, already past midnight, and the party next door showed no signs of winding down. The bass vibrated through my floorboards, rattling the framed photos on my dresser. Scout, usually a sound sleeper, was restless, pacing at the foot of my bed, a low whine escaping his throat. That was it. My loyalty to my dog, his comfort, that was the line. My impulsiveness, usually dormant, surged. I flung on a jacket, my jaw set, and marched out the back door, intent on putting an end to the charade. "Hey," I yelled, my voice cutting through the cacophony. A group of 4, 2 of the Caldwells and 2 of their friends I recognized from previous nights, turned towards me, beers in hand. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and cheap cigarettes. Mr. Caldwell squinted at me, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of his porch light. "Can you guys keep it down? It's past midnight, there's a quiet hour," I said, trying to keep my voice even despite the tremor of frustration in my chest. A lanky man, one of their friends, stepped forward, swaying slightly. His eyes were glazed and a sneer twisted his lips. "What's it to you, old man? We're just having some fun." "It's to me that I live here," I retorted, my voice rising. "And I'd like to sleep." Says 10 o'clock, that's when the cussing started. A barrage of slurred insults, aggressive posturing, threats. They refused to leave, refused to lower the music. My frustration morphed into a cold, hard anger. This wasn't just about noise, it was about outright defiance, a blatant disregard for basic decency. My stubborn streak hardened into a resolve. "Fine," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Dig your own graves." I retreated back into my apartment, not to sulk, but to strategize. I pulled out my phone, opened the voice recorder, and held it up to the wall, capturing the ongoing din. Every shout, every bass thump, every drunken laugh, I recorded for a full 10 minutes, then timestamped it. I sent a text to my landlord, Mr. Henderson, a man I respected for his no-nonsense approach and fair dealings. I briefly explained the situation, attaching the audio file. His reply was immediate. "On it, Reese, thanks for the heads up." For the next half hour, the noise continued unabated. Then, abruptly, the music cut out. I heard the scuffle of feet, the slurred goodbyes, and the heavy thud of the Caldwells' front door. A wave of relief washed over me. Perhaps they'd finally gotten the message, but no. A few minutes later, a thunderous bam echoed through my ceiling, then another and another. Someone was deliberately banging on the floor directly above my bedroom. It was petty, vindictive, a childish tantrum. My anger flared anew, but I kept my phone recording. This happened 3 more times between 12:30 and 3:00 a.m., each time the banging seemingly designed to rattle my sanity. Each time I recorded it. Each time I felt a grim satisfaction knowing I was building an airtight case. The next morning, the air in Maple Grove felt strangely charged. I was tired, but there was a fierce satisfaction humming beneath my exhaustion. Mr. Henderson, true to his word, arrived promptly. I watched from my window as he strode up to the Caldwell's door, a grim set to his jaw, an official-looking envelope in his hand. He wasn't there for a friendly chat. He was there to lay down the law. A tense, hushed conversation ensued, punctuated by Mr. Caldwell's indignant hand gestures. Finally, Mr. Henderson turned and walked away, his mission accomplished. Later that day, I received an email from him. Mr. Caldwell had been served his final warning for noise violations. One more complaint and they would be evicted. Mr. Henderson had also tightened the quiet hour to 10:00 p.m. for everyone, a measure that didn't bother me in the slightest since Scout and I were usually tucked in by then anyway. It felt like a solid win, a promise of quiet time ahead. I allowed myself a small, smug smile. I thought the worst was over. I was so terribly wrong. Subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. The peace I thought I had secured lasted precisely 3 days. 3 blissful days of relative quiet, of evening strolls with Scout without the fear of a booming bass line jolting us. Then the true malice began. It started subtly. I noticed a stray beer can near my porch, even though I'd swept the area meticulously. A discarded cigarette butt on my lawn, annoying but easily dismissed as careless littering. But the true escalation, the incident that ignited a furious personal vendetta within me, happened on a sunny Saturday morning. I had let Scout out into our small, gravel-covered backyard for his morning routine. It wasn't a sprawling yard, but it was fenced, secure, and I kept it clean. The Caldwells had no direct access to it from their unit, only through a shared, gated alleyway that ran between our houses. It was a space I rarely used beyond Scout's morning and evening excursions, but it was still my space. As I waited for Scout to finish, my gaze drifted to the far corner of the yard, near the fence line we shared with the Caldwells. I noticed a pile of objects I hadn't seen before, a worn-out camping tent, a few plastic bins, a deflated air mattress. It looked like someone had dumped their clutter there. I vaguely recalled the Reddit post mentioning the neighbors' friends storing stuff in their backyard, but I had no idea why it was in my backyard. It was an eyesore, but I figured I'd address it later with the landlord. Then Scout, usually meticulous about his business, whined. A low, confused sound. He scratched at his nose, then shook his head violently. My curiosity piqued. I walked over to investigate. As I got closer, the air hit me first. A noxious, putrid stench that made my stomach churn. It wasn't just old garbage, it was worse. Much, much worse. My eyes narrowed, scanning the pile, and then I saw it. Splattered across the faded green canvas of the tent, smeared across the side of one of the plastic bins, was a grotesque, wet mess. Feces, dog feces, lots of it. And something else, something runny and brownish yellow that looked suspiciously like vomit. It had been deliberately, meticulously applied, not just dumped, but spread. It clung to the fabric, seeped into the plastic, a sickening, grotesque mural of pure disgust. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't carelessness. This was an attack, and then my eyes landed on something else, something that made my blood run cold. One of Scout's favorite chew toys, a battered, rope-braided bone, lay half-buried in the mess, coated in the vile excrement. And next to it, my small, sturdy garden trowel, the one I used to tend my few rose bushes, was also defiled. This wasn't just about their friends' stuff or even generic dog waste. This was personal. This was a direct, targeted violation of my space, using my dog's waste, or at least a dog's waste, to desecrate my belongings, Scout's belongings. They were sending a message. A slow, terrifying heat spread through me, starting in my chest and rushing to my face. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. My calm, rational facade shattered, replaced by a raw, guttural surge of pure rage. This wasn't merely a nuisance anymore. This was an affront to my family, an act of contempt directed at the very core of my peace. My motivation for a quiet life shifted, twisting into a burning desire for retribution. The unexpected victim of their petty revenge, I was now consumed by a furious, personal vendetta. I promised myself then and there, standing amidst that stench, that the Caldwells and whoever their friends were would regret the day they decided to make an enemy of Reese Kincaid. The promise of justice, of making them pay for this vile act, was the only thing I could think of. The audience, I hoped, was feeling the same visceral outrage I was. My initial reaction, fueled by my impulsive nature, was to storm over to the Caldwells' door, drag them out, and force their faces into the vile mess they had created. But a sliver of my stubborn logic, a hard-earned lesson from years of trying to solve problems calmly, held me back. I was boiling, yes, but I needed to think. This wasn't a shouting match. This was psychological warfare. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the stench making me gag, and forced myself to get my phone. I took dozens of photos, close-ups, and wide shots, documenting every sickening detail. I even managed to capture a few of the peculiar stains that hinted at the something else mixed in with the waste. This was evidence, irrefutable proof of their depravity. I spent the next hour cleaning up the abhorrent mess, wearing thick gloves and a respirator, scrubbing and hosing down everything. I threw away Scout's chew toy, the garden trowel, anything that couldn't be completely sanitized. It felt like I was scrubbing my very soul. The camping gear still covered in filth, I pushed to the very edge of my property line, a clear message that it was not welcome. My next call was to Mr. Henderson. I sent him the photos, my voice tight with barely suppressed fury as I explained what I had found. This isn't just noise, Mr. Henderson. This is vandalism. This is a deliberate, disgusting act, and it involved dog waste on my property. Mr. Henderson listened patiently, his voice grave. Reese, I understand your anger. This is completely unacceptable. Unfortunately, proving who did it is the hard part. Did you see anyone? No, I admitted, my shoulders slumping. But it was clearly targeted, and they're the only ones with a yappy dog whose friends store their crap in my yard, he sighed. I'll send them a notice about the unauthorized storage of items on your property and demand immediate removal. As for the mess, it's tricky. Without direct proof, the police will likely say it's a civil matter. My heart sank. A civil matter? This wasn't civil. This was an act of war. My frustration with the system began to mount. I called the non-emergency police line anyway, detailing the incident. The officer who took my report sounded bored, advising me to get security cameras and to keep a detailed log. He assured me they would send an officer to observe the situation if warranted. I thanked him, but felt utterly helpless. Current emotional state of the audience, I hoped, matched mine. Outrage, a feeling of despair at the inadequacy of official channels, and rising helplessness. True to their pattern, the Caldwells escalated in response to my complaints. The camping chair man, Mr. Caldwell himself, seemed to ramp up his staring sessions. He'd sit there for hours, occasionally muttering under his breath, sometimes giving me a chilling, toothless grin if I glanced his way. It felt like a constant, low-level psychological attack. His friends started bringing their yappy, untrained chihuahua more frequently. It wasn't just yapping, it was a non-stop, high-pitched shriek that could pierce steel. They let it run loose in the shared alleyway, and of course it would poop, and of course they wouldn't clean it up. The alleyway, once a clean thoroughfare, began to resemble a minefield of canine excrement. I tried talking to other neighbors. Mrs. Rodriguez, a sweet elderly woman 2 houses down, just wrung her hands. Oh dear, they are quite boisterous. I just try to keep to myself. Mr. Davis, a burly man who worked nights, just grunted. Too much trouble, Reese, not worth it. Their fear, their reluctance to get involved, only deepened my sense of isolation. I was on my own. My loyalty to my home, my peace, was being tested by an increasingly hostile environment. My stubbornness wouldn't allow me to back down. I invested in a comprehensive security camera system. 2 cameras, one pointed at my backyard, another at the shared alleyway. I meticulously set up motion detection and cloud storage. Every night before I went to bed, I'd check the feeds, watching for any suspicious activity. My sleep became fractured, haunted by the fear of what new violation I'd wake up to. Scout, too, seemed to sense the shift. He was more watchful, his ears perpetually pricked, a low growl rumbling in his chest at the sound of a raised voice next door. My precious companion, my family, was also suffering because of them. This only hardened my resolve. One evening, as I was reviewing some footage, I caught a glimpse of something infuriating. One of the Caldwells' friends, the lanky one who had been so aggressive that first night, was out in the alleyway with his chihuahua. I watched, my blood pressure rising, as the dog squatted, deposited a fresh pile, and the man simply walked away, not even bothering to glance back. I replayed the footage, zoomed in crystal clear proof. I captured the timestamp, the exact coordinates. This was it. This was a direct, irrefutable violation of a city ordinance. I compiled a meticulously detailed log, dates, times, specific incidents, the noise violations, the daily loitering, the discarded trash, the dog waste. I attached the photographs of my desecrated property, the video of the uncleaned waste. I included the officer's report number and a copy of the final warning Mr. Henderson had issued. I sent it all, certified mail, to Mr. Henderson with a copy to the local city's code enforcement department. I was leaving no stone unturned, expending every ounce of energy, every resource I had to fight them through official channels. The cost of the cameras, the time spent logging, the constant anxiety, it was all adding up, chipping away at my finances and my sanity. A few days later, a notice appeared on the Caldwells' door, delivered by code enforcement. It cited them for property blight and unsanitary conditions due to the unclean dog waste in the alleyway and the abandoned items in my yard. It gave them 48 hours to comply or face fines. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of the end. I hoped the audience felt a brief moment of hope too, a small payoff of progress before the inevitable crushing setback. The Caldwells' response was typical. They cleaned up the dog waste grudgingly but left the accumulated garbage in my backyard, and the passive-aggressive harassment intensified. The man sitting outside my window seemed to increase his hours, sometimes muttering my name. One morning I found a dead bird on my doorstep, arranged almost deliberately. Scout whimpered when he saw it. This wasn't just neighbors from hell, this was calculated cruelty. It was designed to break me. Every setback, every new nuisance pushed me closer to a breaking point. My once quiet life had been consumed by this bitter war. I was hitting rock bottom, feeling utterly trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. My home, once my sanctuary, had become a cage. I felt a profound despair, a draining helplessness that left me hollowed out. But beneath it, a stubborn ember of rage still glowed, waiting for its moment. Subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. The dead bird was the turning point, not the worst thing they'd done, not the most damaging, but the most personal. It was a message, a small, chilling symbol of their malice, placed right where I would find it first thing in the morning. It was meant to unnerve me, to wear me down, and for a moment it did. I stood there, staring at the small, stiff body, feeling a cold knot of dread in my stomach. But then, as Scout whined softly beside me, nudging my hand with his nose, something shifted within me. The despair, the helplessness began to recede, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. They wanted to play dirty. Fine. My stubbornness, pushed to its absolute limit, snapped. My impulsive nature, previously reined in, was now entirely unleashed, but this time it was guided by a month of meticulous observation and simmering rage. My furious personal vendetta was no longer a thought. It was a plan, fully formed and waiting for its moment. My role as the unsuspecting victim was over. It was time for retribution. I spent the next week observing them like a hawk. I noted their patterns, their peak drunken hours, the times their friends came and went, the specific nights the lanky friend brought his yappy chihuahua. I learned that the accumulated junk in my backyard belonged exclusively to the lanky friend, Dax, who seemed to use the Caldwell's apartment as a drop-off point for his various, dubious endeavors. He had a battered old pickup truck that he'd sometimes load with the bins, only to return them later, seemingly untouched. His casual disregard for my property, using it as a personal storage locker, added another layer to my simmering anger. This wasn't just revenge, this was reclaiming my territory. My plan began to take shape, born from the depths of their own disgusting act. If they wanted to play with dog waste, I'd give them a symphony of filth. My motivation to protect my home, my family, and my sanity had morphed into a singular, unwavering focus, to make them regret every single second they'd invaded my peace. The first step was gathering the ammunition. I didn't want to use Scout's waste. That felt too personal, too much like I was defiling my own dog. No, I wanted their dog's waste. The Chihuahua, the yapper, the one whose droppings they never cleaned up from the alleyway. Over several days, armed with a shovel, thick gloves, and an empty gallon-sized paint can with a secure lid, I meticulously collected every fresh pile the Chihuahua left behind. It was a vile task, made worse by the flies in the summer heat, but each scoop was a measure of grim satisfaction. I also bought a few bottles of concentrated liquid-ass spray online. The reviews promised an odor so potent and repulsive it could clear a building. Perfect. Next, I needed to ensure I wouldn't be caught. My newly installed security cameras were a double-edged sword. They protected me, but they also recorded me. I needed a blind spot. I studied the camera angles, timing their sweeps. I found a narrow window, a few precious seconds when the alleyway camera panned away and the backyard camera was obscured by the overgrown lilac bush. It would be tight, but it was doable. My impulsiveness was now refined by careful planning. I also dug up some old work clothes, a pair of dark gloves, and a beanie to obscure my features. I looked like a petty thief, but I was on a mission of extreme prejudice. The night I chose was a Friday. Dax and his friends were over, and the usual party was in full swing, albeit slightly more subdued due to the tight and quiet hours. They were drinking heavily, their voices slurred, their attention clearly elsewhere. My cameras confirmed no one was in the backyard. The moon was a sliver, offering minimal light. Around 11:30 p.m., when the party was at its peak and the Caldwells were definitely preoccupied, I donned my disguise. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs, a mix of fear and exhilarating anticipation. This was it. I crept out my back door, moving like a shadow, taking advantage of every patch of darkness. I hugged the side of my house, reaching the back corner where Dax's assorted junk lay. The putrid smell from the previous desecration still lingered faintly, a ghost of their disrespect. I opened the paint can. The smell of the collected Chihuahua waste, fermenting for days in the summer heat, was unbelievably potent. It was an assault on the senses, gag-inducing. I had to fight the urge to vomit. I opened the first plastic storage bin. Inside, it was a haphazard collection of old clothes, some warped vinyl records, and what looked like car parts. Perfect. I poured a generous amount of the festering waste over the clothes, ensuring it seeped into the fabric. I then sprayed a healthy dose of the liquid ass, watching as the fine mist settled, promising a lingering, inescapable stench. I sealed the bin. One down, the next bin contained old tools, some rusting, some covered in grease. I didn't want to ruin the tools, but I wanted them to be a vector for the smell. I sprayed a liberal amount of liquid ass onto the tools themselves, knowing the porous rust would hold the odor for a long, long time. Then I dug through the paint can, pulled out a particularly solid piece of feces, and carefully tucked it deep inside an old, greasy rag in the corner of the bin. The air mattress and the camping tent were next. The air mattress was deflated, folded into a large bag. I opened the bag, pulled out a corner of the mattress, and spread a thick layer of the festering dog waste onto its rubberized surface, letting it seep into the folds. Then came the liquid ass, saturating the fabric of the bag and the mattress itself. The tent, already carrying the faint memory of previous defilement, was an easy target. I unzipped its various compartments, smearing the remaining waste inside on the zippers on the mesh. I ensured every item was thoroughly permeated, leaving no corner untouched. The thought of them opening these later unsuspecting was a sweet, cold wave of satisfaction. I worked quickly, silently, my movements precise and practiced. Every few seconds I paused, listening, my ears straining for any sign of movement next door. The sounds of their party, muffled by my walls, were a comforting cover. Just as the alleyway camera began its sweep back towards my position, I slipped back into my house, my heart still racing but a triumphant grin spreading across my face. I stripped off the clothes, double-bagged them, and immediately took them to an outdoor dumpster, far from my property. The smell, even on my hands, seemed to linger for hours, a vile trophy of my vengeance. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw, but the phantom odor remained, a constant reminder of what I had done and what had driven me to it. My loyalty to Scout, to my home, had demanded this. The immediate aftermath was quiet, too quiet. I spent the next day watching, waiting, and almost giddy anticipation bubbling in my stomach. The smell, however, began to emanate from the Caldwell's yard, seeping over the fence, a faint, nauseating whisper on the breeze. It mingled with the lingering smell of their cheap beer and cigarettes, creating a truly unique and repulsive olfactory profile. On Sunday morning, the inevitable happened. I was enjoying my coffee, Scout snoozing at my feet, when I heard it. A guttural scream from next door, not a party scream, but a shriek of pure, unadulterated disgust. Then shouts, angry, violent shouts. "What the hell is this?" I heard Dax's voice, raw with fury. "My stuff." "It stinks." Then the Caldwell's voices, defensive, angry. "We don't know, we haven't touched it." The argument escalated, becoming a cacophony of accusations and denial. I heard the unmistakable sound of something heavy being thrown, followed by a crash. A window slammed shut, doors creaked. The sounds of a full-blown domestic dispute, punctuated by gagging noises and increasingly foul language, erupted from the Caldwell's apartment. This was the grand payoff. The consequences were immediate and dramatic. Dax, convinced the Caldwells had somehow sabotaged his belongings, or at least been culpably negligent, started moving his foul-smelling junk out of my yard, cursing a blue streak the entire time. He loaded it into his pickup truck, leaving a trail of stench wherever he went. The yappy chihuahua, oddly, was nowhere to be seen. The friendship clearly was in tatters. The smell, however, lingered. It permeated the Caldwells' apartment, their clothes, their very existence. I would see Mr. Caldwell sitting outside his window, but now he wasn't just staring. He was grimacing, swatting at imaginary flies, the stench a constant torment. His friends stopped coming over entirely. Who would want to visit a place that smelled like a sewer? The source of their noise, their constant disruption, had been eliminated from within. 2 weeks later, I heard more shouting, this time between Mr. Caldwell and Mr. Henderson. It seemed a new noise complaint had been filed, not by me, but by one of their remaining neighbors who had complained about the constant yelling and fighting between the Caldwells and their now ex-friends. The continuous internal strife, fueled by the invisible but pervasive stench, had been their undoing. Mr. Henderson, true to his word, had no choice. Within days, another eviction notice appeared on their door, this one final. They were gone by the end of the month, their departure marked not by a moving truck, but by a hasty, desperate scattering of belongings. They simply vanished, leaving behind a lingering odor that slowly, blessedly began to dissipate with time. Maple Grove returned to its natural hum. The quiet, once a fragile hope, was now a tangible reality. My garden flourished, Scout roamed freely in a clean backyard, and I could leave my curtains open, basking in the sun. I had faced the storm, and I had prevailed. The vindication was immense, a deep satisfaction that hummed in my bones. My home was truly my sanctuary once more. I had transformed not just from a victim to a survivor, but into something a little harder, a little more resilient, and a lot more willing to fight for my peace. I was no longer the unsuspecting victim. I was the architect of my own justice, and as for the items Dax had stored in my backyard. Months later, long after the Caldwells were a distant, malodorous memory, I saw a news report. A small-time criminal ring dealing in stolen car parts had been busted. The leader's description, along with the specific type of parts mentioned, sent a shiver down my spine. It sounded eerily like Dax. Apparently his friend's stuff had contained more than just dirty laundry. My little act of revenge had unintentionally complicated his life far beyond just a bad smell, perhaps even aiding in his downfall. The grand payoff, it turned out, had a surprising karmic twist. If you ever find yourself caught in a nightmare of endless noise and disrespectful intrusions, remember my story. Sometimes the quietest people have the loudest solutions. Subscribe to Neighbours from Hell channel for new Neighbours from Hell stories daily.